Why is it taking me so long to find that out? Hello guys, and welcome to this Volks Wizard video, which today is about a car that should have been featured on this channel many years ago. It is the Mk3 SEAT Leon CUPRA. The reason it's not been featured is because I've never actually bought one before to sell on, but I've just bought this one, and because I've been really curious about this car, I've been driving it around to try and get a feel for it and see how it compares with other Volkswagen Group hot hatches. And in doing that, I've kind of come to a realization that it reminds me of one car in particular, and believe it or not, that is my Mk8 Golf GTI Clubsport. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you why I think the Mk3 SEAT Leon CUPRA is the cut price alternative to the Mk8 Golf GTI Clubsport. Okay, let's start off by comparing these two cars on paper. Before we do that, I need to tell you a little bit more about this one, because you probably know everything you need to know about my Clubsport. So this is a late 2016 SEAT Leon CUPRA 290 Black Edition. It's basically a run-out model of the pre-facelift Leon, because just around the corner in 2017 the range was facelifted, and like a lot of people, I think these pre-facelift Cupras look a lot more aggressive than the newer models. As you can probably tell by its name, it produces 290 metric horsepower. The Clubsport produces 300. Its weakest on paper statistic is torque, 350 Newton meters for the Cupra versus 400 of the Clubsport. But that doesn't seem to affect performance too much, as we'll find out in a sec. They've both got the VAQ front differential to help them put down power. That's because they're both front wheel drive, and as a result they've both got very similar 0 to 60 times. So the Clubsport does it in 5.6 seconds, but just 0.1 of a second behind we have the Cupra at 5.7 seconds. That's as long as it's got the DSG gearbox. You could have manual or DSG pretty much throughout the production run of this generation of car. This is a manual Leon CUPRA, and it does 0 to 60 in 6 seconds, which may not sound great, but that's just 0.2 of a second behind the Mk7 Golf GTI Clubsport S, which was stripped out and had 20 horsepower more. So I think that's pretty good going. They're both limited to 155 miles an hour as a top speed, but I'm pretty sure if they were delimited they'd both be very close, and that's because they have a very similar power to weight ratio. It's just unbelievably close. So the Clubsport has a power to weight ratio of 205.33 metric horsepower per tonne. The Cupra's is 204.94, so that's less than half a horsepower difference. I bet manufacturing tolerances could neutralise that. They have also both set similar lap times at the Nürburgring's Nordschleife. In fact, this was a front-wheel drive lap record car for a short period when it was equipped with a sub 8 pack, which gave it sticky tyres and bigger brakes and some other bits and pieces on that actual car. Lap time for that was 7 minutes 58 seconds, which was back in I think 2014, which was pretty good going. This, I'm not sure how it was equipped, but it would be pretty production ready, I think. Did it in 7:54, so just 4 seconds difference. To put it into perspective, the stripped out Clubsport S with cup 2s did it in 7 minutes 47, so they're both bloody quick around the Nordschleife, that's for sure. Price wise, when the Cupra came out in 2014 they were about £27,000. the Golf R then was £30,000 when it came out 3-door manual. Today, allowing for inflation, that would make this car around £31,500, which funnily enough is within £500 of what I actually paid for this car. The RRP was much higher, but with a discount this car was £32,000. The good news is today you can buy a Leon CUPRA 280 from around £10,000 if it's had a hard life, done a few miles. Good examples are roughly about half the price of what I paid for this. So from about £15,000 you can get a 290 Black Edition like this one. This one's a particularly good low mileage one. This actual car is for sale at £18,000, which even then sounds like really good value for money. So if you like the sound of that, stay tuned, because we're now going to have a look at the outside and the inside of these two surprisingly similar hot hatches. Okay, as you can probably already see, these cars are superficially different in their styling, but because they're based on the MQB platform, their proportions are very similar. The designs are 7 years apart, so the Leon is looking a little bit dated now, but it's not that bad actually. As a design, I think it hangs together a lot better than the new Leon, primarily because this was the clean sheet design on the new MQB platform, the facelift and the new one that came out last year. They're all basically tweaks of this, and I think when it's the original design it looks a lot purer, so this just hangs together really nicely, particularly in 3-door. The back of it's beautiful, but this is still a great looking car. Look at that crease there, that is flamboyant car design. What helps this one is that it's got 19-inch wheels, which were standard on the black edition. 18s were standard on the earlier Cupras, and I didn't notice it straight away, but they've got that spokey design that was a BBS trademark. So this Cupra has actually got a more GTI style wheel than Volkswagen give you with the Clubsport from the factory. The reason I bought these Volkswagens was because they had a similar sort of spokey BBS inspired designs. That's quite funny. It's got black mirror casings, which they don't give you on the standard Clubsport, but you do get that on the Edition 45. As people have said on social media, it looks quite plain, primarily because the FR models mimic the Cupra very, very closely, much more so than, say, an R-Line mimics an R. And that's no bad thing, because it means you can drive this and people really don't know what it is. The only real giveaway, if you debadge it, which is ever so easy, is the exhaust. So we've got some sort of ovalish tailpipes there. They're not big, they're quite tucked under the bumper. When they've got black soot on them, they're not particularly noticeable. So if you really want to go under the radar, this is the car. I mean, compare this red car to how a Lapis Blue R sticks out like a sore thumb, and you'll get my drift. Right, let's have a look inside this Leon Cupra. So this is a black edition, and it comes with these bucket type seats. Now where have we seen this sort of halfway house bucket seat before, I wonder? There it is. So who'd have thought it? Leon's had these way before they started chucking them in every Mk8 Golf. That's no bad thing though, they are very, very comfortable. Nice bit of stainless steel sill cover there, which we never get on Golfs these days. The plastics do look a bit cheap compared to Mark 7 and 7.5, and there's no chrome tips on the electric window switches there. So yeah, compared to 7.5, it does feel like a bit of a downgrade in there, but funnily enough, compared to Mark 8, I'm not sure it's that different. Okay, we've got the chrome tips, but the plastic's a little bit cheap. Carpets are definitely a downgrade on the Mark 8 from 7.5. What are they like on this car? You know what? I'd say they're actually probably a grade above the Mark 8. And what's also strangely similar is that we've got the infotainment screen right at the top of the dash there, which is very different to the previous Golfs, but very similar in the Leon. And I like that. I ran a diesel Leon for a while when I moved out to the country, and I'd love the dashboard. Okay, it's a bit lower quality here and there, but ergonomically having the screen there is a lot better. Driving position is very similar. They never get this really wrong or change it an awful lot on these cars, so let's just get in and see what it's like in the hot seat. So yeah, this seat really does feel familiar. It's a pre-facelift car, so we've got the normal analog dials. We do have climate controls here. They're pretty much a blacked out version of the ones on Golf 7. And the glove box, unlined, unlike Mark 7 7.5. I've got to get up and show you the glove box in my car. Once again, an unlined glove box. So a lot of the reasons why you'd have bought the Golf over the Leon don't exist anymore with the Mark 8. I do hope my bucket seats don't wear as badly as these, because these are notorious for this sort of weird, very cheap plastic. It almost feels like fabric ripping and the Clubsport's got similar sort of fabric in the same position. Bit of a throwback with these cars, I think that was resolved with the facelift cars, is that we have a manual handbrake, which with the manual gearbox is a real throwback. Yeah, a nice cabin though. I mean, this is, as I say, an early model. The facelift ones are a little bit nicer inside, particularly around the infotainment screen area, and they look great when they've got the digital instrument cluster, stainless steel pedals as well, decent quality floor mats. I think they're actually better quality floor mats than the ones in my Golf. So the new Leon has a USP of having more legroom in the back, so I'm not sure there's an awful lot of difference between this and a Golf. It's perfectly acceptable though, and these bucket seats are pretty slim, so they don't intrude too much on rear passenger knee space. But yeah, it's all right in here. It's a bit like a coal bunker with all the black everywhere, but actually the white bits on the doors and the seats really do lift it up. Quite a lot of nice Cupra in the Alcantara there. And we've got plastic trims here, and they do look plasticky. They're plasticky on the Mk8 now when they weren't on the 7.5, but they do look a bit more convincing than those. Let's have a look in the boot then. So you open it with the SEAT badge, which sometimes can stick in position. Okay, it's a big boot. I bet you litres wise it's very similar to the Golf. It's not too level though, so you can't, this is how it is. Down here we've got a space saver spare wheel, which I'm not sure if that's option or not. It definitely was option on a lot of Leons, even pre-facelift. But yeah, it's nice to have. But have a look at that, you can see the boot floor. I don't think we've been able to see the boot floor for quite a long time in Golf. Was it Mark 6? Definitely Mark 7 had a carpeted boot floor, which does keep road noise down, as we'll find out when we go for a drive. Let me just show you the boot of my car. Okay, so we've got a 2-level boot floor, so I can have that lower if I want to, and under there we have a carpeted spare wheel well, but somewhat ironically we don't have a spare wheel. Now let's have a look under the bonnet and see how they compare, because both these cars have got cheap nasty bonnet struts. I'm going to put the camera down and lift them up right now. Okay, as well as both having manual bonnet struts, they've both got EA888 engines nestled in their engine bays. This is an Evo 3 and this is an Evo 4. I won't pretend to know what the differences are, but all I can say is that they're both very similar engines. So they're both 2-litre, 4-cylinder, petrol, turbo, and as I said earlier, they're both produced within 10 horsepower of each other. Most obvious difference is that we have this much prettier engine cover on the Cupra, which is very similar to the one on 7.5 Golf. On here we have this sort of saggy old piece of rubber. Not to do with the accountants apparently saving money, it's to do with if you run someone over, it's better for them to land on the bonnet when it's got something soft underneath it than something hard like this. What you can blame the accountants for is the lack of paint though. This must be the base coat for the silver paint. There's really only a light dusting of silver on there. On this cheaper Spanish car, we have pretty much as good a finish under the bonnet as we do on the rest of the car. And look at the bonnet as well, that is actually red, this is grey. So yeah, quite a big difference there. Bit of a sad reflection on quality standards at Volkswagen maybe. But anyway, let's put that to one side and go and drive these two wonderful hot hatches. Okay, I thought we'd start off with my Mk8 Golf GTI Clubsport. I've had this car 6 months now and I still dearly love it. I know we've had our ups and downs, but it's just as exciting to drive today as it was back on the 1st of March when I collected it. Now there are a couple of similarities with the Cupra in here I forgot to mention earlier, and that is that we no longer have the sunglasses holder up here, which was a nice feature of the Mark 7 7.5s, and the Cupra doesn't have one either. And also the Cupra's got Apple CarPlay, which brings it into the modern world. Those later Mark 1s have it, I don't think the early ones do. we've got it in this car now. It might be wireless in this car, but actually it doesn't really work properly a lot of the time when you use it wireless, so you'll probably be plugging it in. Anyway, both of them are touchscreen as well, so yeah, that's another similarity. Differences though is that we have got 7-speed DSG in this car. The Cupra in this test is manual. You could get a 6-speed DSG, but I'm not a big fan of that gearbox. 7-speed is so much smoother and faster. I'd probably stick with a manual if I was buying a pre-facelift Mk3 Cupra. Noise wise, it's quite a bit quieter than the Cupra. We've got a bit more sound deadening in the boot, and it's got to be a few decibels quieter, because also it's probably a few decibels louder, loads of pops and bangs, lots and lots of character, which is unexpected for a Volkswagen. And then brakes, well, we've got 357mm in this car, which are the biggest ones they've ever fitted to a Golf. The last biggest were 345mm in the Mark 5 R32, so they work brilliantly on the road. They work brilliantly on the track, as I found out a few weeks ago. Now let's talk about chassis. This car is passive damper, it doesn't have DCC. The Cupra in this test, I think all of them are standard, have got DCC, which is a really nice touch. It's quite firm in Cupra mode, that car very comfortable in comfort mode. This car is probably slightly more comfortable than Cupra mode in its passive damper state, which means it is quite firm, but it's firm in a sophisticated kind of way. I really need to drive a Mark 7.5 and 19s back to back like a GTI Performance or an R just to reassure myself that's right, but this car feels a lot better and a lot less crashy. I think that's the way to put it. And the upshot of that is you get amazing body control like this. It is in a different league to those earlier cars. It just goes around corners with such agility. This is what's really kept me liking this car, the way it just demolishes a road like this. We've got the VAQ front differential up front, but I don't think it troubles its traction as much as the early cars. It's got much more mechanical grip, so let's just full throttle out of this one, and it just grips and goes. And let's talk about performance. Well, 300 horsepower, 400 newton meters, so it is not slow. It's got the 4,000 RPM kick of the Cupra. I think being an auto takes away some of the sensation of speed, but yeah. You've seen the Golf Rs and the drag strips. Once this car gets going, it's at least as quick as that car. But the Cupra, if it's behind at all, is not far back very much. Power to weight ratio, very, very similar, which I think is impressive considering that Cupra now is getting on 7 years old. So it's clearly a great car, this Mk8 Golf GTI Clubsport, but could the cut price Cupra be even greater? Well, let's go and find out. Okay guys, here we are driving the Mk3 SEAT Leon CUPRA, and as expected I feel totally at home in this car, partly because the seats are very similar to those in the Clubsport. They're supportive without being restrictive, partly because the infotainment screen is in pretty much the same position, which is really easy to operate and really easy to look at while you're driving. One big difference is that I'm shifting manually, but it's no hardship. It's not a bad shift. It's not as good as the one in the Mark 7 Clubsport S, which is surprising because they're basically made from the same ingredients, but I presume this one's had a different chef. It's probably one from McDonald's compared to the Marco PR White behind the shift of the Clubsport S, but it's okay, don't get me wrong. Another difference is noise. This car does produce a lot more road noise, and that's as suspected because it does not have a lined boot floor. I don't think it's just because we're on 19s with this car. Even the smaller wheel cars do boom quite a lot compared to a Golf. I'd be looking to deal with that somehow if I actually ran one of these as a daily. The other noise, exhaust noise, is a little bit less characterful than in the Clubsport. That pops and farts when you're in the sportiest of modes, while this car, you might be able to ease a bit of a DSG fart out of even a manual between gear changes if you give it a real pasting. Other than that, it sounds okay. We've got various driving modes, and in Cupra mode it does sound really fake. It does that sort of Subaru Impreza noise, but actually in Sport, which is the normal mode for this car, it's a reasonably good balance of real intake and exhaust noise and fakery. The brakes, by the way, 340 mil. That's the same as on a Golf R, and because it's lighter, they shouldn't be worked as hard. So I think they're perfectly fine for the road. If you take it on track, you might be wishing you had the 370mm Brembos from the sub 8 pack. Now let's talk about handling and performance together. So we've got multi-link rear suspension, we've got dynamic chassis control, which means we can soften it off into comfort mode, and it's really actually quite comfortable. Sometimes there's a little bit of jarring because of the wheels before the springs can actually move and the shocks can take up the bump, but generally actually it's really good. It's a lot more compliant than my non-DCC Clubsport. This is a particularly well surfaced road. You could drive it in Cupra mode if you wanted to, like we are now, and actually that does increase the steering weight quite a lot, so you probably want to mix and match to get that weight but not have the dampers so firm on most roads. So this is Cupra mode, and there's definitely a lot more weight to the steering, and when you turn in like that, it does feel a bit better than the other modes where there's just not an awful lot of weighting to the steering. The Clubsport's different in that when you throw that into a corner, the steering gets a lot heavier, and then as you straighten up, it loses some of that weight. This is sort of not as obviously weighted as you load it up, but it's still okay. I think that's probably the weakest part of this car. Brakes, as I said, aren't too bad. And then performance and power. This is a quick car. We've got that VAQ front differential up front, and you need it even in the dry. One big difference over the Clubsport is that you can really feel that VAQ diff bite. You power out of a tight corner and it does tighten your line apparently, and the steering wheel moves, and you're going to need a good chassis because this is one really fast car. I think it feels faster than my Clubsport, to be honest. Might be because it's manual, doesn't kick down when you floor it, but it's just got so much torque, and at 4,000 RPM, if you drop it down there, 4,000 now, it just goes ballistic. Oh man, give me those 370mm brakes, because I think I'm going to need them on the road. I take it all back. So yeah, it goes around corners incredibly well. It's fast. It's relatively refined. This is a great car. Why is it taking me so long to find that out? Well, as you can probably tell, I'm a big fan of the Mk3 SEAT Leon CUPRA. It's quite funny really, because I had to wait until 2019 before Volkswagen produced a GTI that gave me the levels of performance and practicality that I wanted in a car that was the TCR, which the Clubsport is basically the latest incarnation of. Little did I know that in Martorell, near Barcelona, SEAT were already producing my perfect car 6 years earlier. There is one little caveat to this though, and that is to do with the thing that nestles in the middle of the radiator grille, the Volkswagen badge. Now, even though Volkswagen have had a tough time over recent years, the Golf is still seen as a premium car. Well, the Leon is just another European hatchback, so it kind of blends in with the Focus, the Astra, and like Hyundais as well from Korea. This still has an air of class about it, which this car doesn't have. Look at it this way: if you were a millionaire and you wanted to have a small practical car to go in and out of town with to keep your GT3s for weekends, you would probably buy a Golf GTI. I couldn't see somebody like that buying a Leon. Now, that's of no consequence if you're not a badge snob. Unfortunately, a lot of people are. But if you're not, that's great news, because you can have one of the best driving Volkswagen Group hot hatches ever for not an awful lot of money, the SEAT Leon CUPRA. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this Volks Wizard video. If you've enjoyed it, as ever, give it a thumbs up. Please do comment, please do share, and please do, because every subscription means a lot to a small channel like this, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.